Welcome everyone to the first webinar for Tuesday of the virtual SMA conference. This is Sarah from Cure SMA's Family Support Department. Thank you so much for joining us today. We would also like to thank our national presenting sponsors, Avexis, Biogen, and Genentech for their generous support of the 2020 virtual SMA conference. We would also like to recognize the support of our visionary sponsor, Ionis, our platinum sponsor, Scholar Rock, and our silver sponsors, Accredo and Promobile. If you've not heard about our Friday evening end of conference celebration, please join us at 7 p.m. Central Time and share on your social media channels what unity means to you as we close out the virtual SMA conference week. We appreciate all of the questions we received in advance of this webinar, and we'll try to answer many of these during the presentation. You are also able to submit questions through the webinar using the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. Also on your control panel, you'll see a PDF handout on aquatic therapy from today's presenter. Please note that all lines will remain muted during the webinar, other than the speakers. We would now like to introduce Jennifer Martyn, a physical therapist with Wave Therapies in Seattle, Washington, who will be presenting on aquatic physical therapy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us so bright and early if you're on the West Coast. I really appreciate everyone being here. I wish that we were together, however, in the water in Orlando, as being in the water is way more interesting when you're talking about aquatic therapy. Aquatic therapy right now in the age of COVID is a whole different world. So we're going to talk about what that looks like for the SMA community and where we can go to continue to use the water safely and functionally. This is the longest I have ever been out of the water in my 25 years of physical therapy practice. So I am really looking forward to getting back in and getting people moving again. Next slide, please. So where I wish we were and where we are. If you look at that slide on the left, that is what my hotel room bathroom looks like when we are in the water at any of the national conferences as we try to dry everything out. Taking a shower is not really a possibility, but looking at everything and thinking about all the creative uses that everybody came up with for all that equipment is what keeps us coming back year after year. That slide on the right is what most pools look like right now. The maintenance guy at my pool is doing a great job of social distancing. A lot of pools are trying to get their annual maintenance done and ready to go for when pools reopen. And pools are going to reopen in different phases and in different contexts in different communities across the country. We are in a strange time from a therapy standpoint. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and how that relates directly to how you can interact in the water. Next slide. So where do you start with a pool and a pandemic? Do you get in a pool now? There are a lot of things to think about from a safety standpoint that I want to highlight as you look to getting into a community pool, going to a beach. Do you get in a pool? Do you build your own pool? Why do you want to think about getting in the water now? What should you do once you're there? And how has COVID changed the face of aquatics for folks with SMA? So let's talk about, do you get in a pool now? Next slide. What to consider when you're using a pool in your community. Community pools are generally the easiest access to water. Most community pools around the country at this point, and honestly around the world, are still closed. The CDC has put out guidelines as to what pools should look like when they reopen. On the next slide is the link to the CDC document on community pools. What does that look like? What are recommendations as far as recreational centers? And feel free to take a look at that document at your convenience. It gives you some good ideas as to what your community centers are thinking about. Next slide. The take-home message for me from that document is it says pools in general are okay. COVID isn't necessarily transmitted in treated pool water, right? Water that is filtered with chlorine and that. The issue with pools is that aerosol, that talking, the virus transmitting through close social contact. So keeping that social distancing in the pool is just as important as keeping your social distancing in the world of gravity. Areas of significant concern, especially for the CDC, and as you think about the community center where you live, are those high touch, high traffic areas, the locker room, the changing room, the bathrooms, the railings. In discussions with my pool, there was talk about the diving board for the dive team. Each diver's going to touch that board. How do we deal with that? All these details that honestly haven't necessarily been in the forefront of those that work in the aquatic realm, but are things that we're all thinking about now. And those high touch areas are really in areas I'm looking to get back to work where we need to be really attentive. The CDC talks about masks, and I have been asked about masks in the aquatic world on a few occasions. The take-home message today, June 9th, understanding that the messages are changing all the time, is that masks will be either required or highly recommended in all community buildings. I know in my community, it will not be an option. Masks have to be worn in your community centers. Masks in the water, however, are hard because once they get wet, they make it really challenging to breathe. For folks with SMA that already have pulmonary challenges, this is difficult. So masks in the water are not recommended due to the fact that they impair breathing. As my staff looks to get back in the water, our plan is to use face shields, those plastic visors that come all the way down in front of your face to give some sort of protection. There are neoprene masks that are better if you get splashed, but aren't so functional if you wind up in and out going under the water and such. Next slide, please. So why get in the water? This really sounds daunting. Face shields and masks, and I can't touch the rails. Why bother? Because the benefits of the water can't be replicated in a gravity-filled world. They just can't. There's no way we can find ourselves in that space of active, independent movement if you have SMA and you're stuck in gravity. So why bother? The next slide, please. The benefits of the water are multiple, and I've listed some of them here just for you to think about as you think about why would I contemplate getting in the water at this point. Social engagement and equalization is huge. The water is the great equalizer. I got to go to a summit earlier this year. I was talking to one of the participants and she said, you know, the great thing about the water, I don't do a whole lot of exercise there, but it's the one time my husband and I can dance and there's nothing between us. That is the great equalizer. That chance to dance, that chance to be close without anything between you and those you love and those you want to be near and play with, siblings playing together, parents engaging with kids, husbands dancing with wives. It's the great equalizer. It's a perfect place to practice a functional skill in a safe environment. If you fall in the water, you get wet. If you fall on land, you get hurt. So the water is a great place to practice those functional skills, that being upright, head control, pulmonary strengthening and practice. It's a great spot for that. And as the water completely surrounds every part that is in contact with it, you get full sensory input that you can't get in the safety and mobility of your chair if you're a full-time chair user, because every inch of your body is surrounded. And as you move through the water, that input between your fingers, around your knees, is unique to the aquatic environment. The water helps to give you some postural support. I've gotten a couple questions on how do I actually get postural support in the water? And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But the support that you can find in the water that you can't find on land is unique. Active and assistive range of motion, to be able to move your body actively on your own, is awesome. And then some of the physiologic benefits. The benefits of just being able to get some exercise, from a cardiac standpoint, is awesome. Pulmonary exercise, simply the act of being in the water, is great pulmonary exercise. Getting your legs and hips stretched out aids in digestion and in kidney function. Those are all a lot of things that the water brings that you just can't find in a gravity environment. It's worth it, but you have to go in and be wise. Next slide, please. But the biggest benefit to being in the water is you get the greatest level of functional independence in the water. Next. That's the greatest level of functional independence is in the water. Gravity weighs on the movement of adults and children with SMA. Gravity is not your friend if you have SMA. The pool gives some of that freedom back with active movement. I got to swim with a woman, she's 28, and I said, so why do you come? What makes it worth the effort to come and be in the water? Because it's a lot of work, and I understand that. She said, the feeling is out of this world, literally like I'm flying in outer space. That's a thing. And the water provides that. And you can be creative in how you get to being that outer space flying individual. Next slide. I am always concerned about pool safety. Every time I get in the water, I have to think in general about pool safety. And now in the age of COVID, I have just one more layer of pool safety to think about. So what do you need to be aware of every single time you get in a pool? Next, for me, pulmonary is always on the top. How do I make sure we're keeping kids and adults safe from a pulmonary standpoint? The water pressure on the chest is great exercise, but it also makes breathing more challenging. So for folks that are in for their first few visits, not used to that pressure, sometimes I need to lift them up a little bit, take the water pressure off, let them get a couple deep breaths, and then come back in the water until their pulmonary system gets strong enough to breathe against that pressure of the water. Folks with ventilators, the American Physical Therapy Association does not like and says it's not wise to put folks on invasive vents, folks with trachs, in the water, because that trach provides support into the lungs. Clearly, water in the lungs is not what we want. I see lots of folks that use a blow-by ventilator. I have those folks in the pool all the time. We pull their chairs right up to the edge, and then we have a long cord that comes from their vent right down next to the pool. Sometimes it's clipped to the pool so they can be on at full time. Sometimes we move in and out. When they want air, we go over and get air. When they want to go swim, we move away. Anyone that's on a ventilator and with me in the water, a requirement for my office is you have to have an ambu bag on your chair. Should something happen to the ventilator, I have to have a way to ventilate, to provide that ventilation for you. I have had to use the ambu bag on a few occasions. It's very stressful for the lifeguards. It takes all the stress off the folks I'm working with because they know that even though there's something happening with their vent, that they're still going to be able to get air and they're still safe. If you use suction on a regular basis, not just when your kid is sick or when you are sick, but on a more regular basis than that, it needs to be, your suction unit needs to be poolside. That's not in the locker room. That's not in your car. It needs to be poolside because when you need suction, it needs to happen right away. Next slide, please. Other areas where I have safety concerns where we need to be aware, G-tubes, suprapubic caths, leg bags, colostomies. In the pool that I work in, all of those things can be in the water. It's not a problem. Clearly, if you have a colostomy, you have to know that your seal is good, but I've never had an issue. Some pools are okay with that. Some pools are not. Leg bags and catheters, I haven't had issue with before. I have some folks that get sensitive around their G-tube insertion sites, and we'll put a piece of Tegaderm over them if that's a problem. If you have a port, it is fine to be in the water. If you have a central line, it is not okay to be in the water. Any sort of open sore or open cut is not okay to be in the water. And I always have folks with rashes get them cleared from their physician. Some rashes are issues in the pool, and some rashes are not. Next. Other things that I'm aware of for anyone that gets in the pool, folks that have issues with swallowing thin liquid precautions, we don't do a whole lot of bubble blowing. I keep their face away from the pool until that precaution is lifted. I see folks with seizures in the pool. I don't have anyone right now with SMA and a seizure issue, but seizures are not necessarily a game breaker, a deal breaker. You just need to have a plan in place for what you're going to do if that happens. Water temperature is an issue and something to be aware of. Therapeutic water is 90 to 95 degrees. Most people are happy in a 92 to 93 degree range. If the pool I work in gets below 90 or gets to 90 or below, we actually cancel most of our folks with Duchenne and with SMA. It's just too cold for them to feel comfortable and to feel good when they get out. That cooler water increases stiffness, makes it harder to breathe because everything gets tight with your body just trying to maintain its internal temperature. So that water temperature is really important. Folks that can move more, folks that are still walking or walking part-time can find that 92 to 93 degrees pretty hot, especially if they're moving a lot. And so for those folks, being in an 86 to 88 degree pool can be pretty comfortable because they have the ability to keep their body temp up with that increased movement. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind and knowing where you are as an individual in regards to your movement. Incontinence, if we have folks that have incontinence issues, we talk about that. Little kids, obviously, are bladder incontinent. We always talk about swim diapers for our little ones and just making sure we have a plan in place for that. Social distancing is a precaution that we need to be aware of now. It's something that I have been aware of superficially from a safety standpoint, trying to keep people from crashing into us when we're in the pool, especially with some of my folks whose balance isn't as strong. But now, clearly from a COVID standpoint, I want to know whatever facility I'm in that I have that ability to be socially distanced from others in the pool from a viral standpoint. I get asked periodically about straws. Straws are not a good idea from my experience in that I like them, conceptually to blow bubbles. And that's a great pulmonary exercise. But on multiple occasions, I've had folks suck water with the intent to blow, and it has not worked out well. So we don't have straws at all in our practice because they can be confusing. Next slide. So I've talked about lots of the serious precautions and safety, but what about the fun part? Like, we're in the pool to have fun. We're in the pool because if you're having fun, it's engaging. And if you're engaged, you want to be there and you want to come back. And this picture that you see here is only a small part of what I have that's really fun. And that's why I love being in the water, because it's so creative and it's a great place to stop and engage in a completely different world. There are a couple of things I want you to take a look at on this picture. In the top corner is the silver pinwheel. I use that a lot for pulmonary practice, for learning to blow, because it's a great visual feedback. And will time how long you can make the pinwheel spin, with the goal of increasing that time the pinwheel goes around. For some of the younger kids I work with, that's been a great tool to help them realize that their breath has purpose and that their breath has a physical output. Right in the middle of the picture is an orange circle and a blue circle. You can blow those and they flip over and they change colors. So that orange flips over and turns blue. It's great for, you have to have your lips really close together. And it's a great practice for that. Again, a great pulmonary exercise. Next slide, please. So I get asked about what do we do that's, sometimes I like to go and we just like to have fun. That's awesome. The water's a perfect place to go have fun and engage with your family. If you're gonna go to the water for fun, you probably have full flotation, a life jacket, a neck collar, maybe some support at your hips. It provides great independence, but typically it's a little harder to be really engaged with your environment as far as being able to be upright and play. Even if you're in the water for fun, attention always has to be given to safety. That life jacket is no substitute for eyes on someone at all times. Equipment for therapy is on the next slide. Oftentimes I'll use some head support for activities for floating in the water, but oftentimes I won't. This is Krista, and many of you have seen her at the national conferences. She's in the water with us there, and she's in the pool before they drained it. And she has what we call boxing gloves. The kids love them, love to be able to box their parents, box the therapist. And those are great. They give a little bit of float, but we also can use them for some resistance. In therapy, sometimes we use weights. They provide some stability. They can provide some independence. But when you're using equipment for therapy, it requires much more engagement from the user. On the next slide, you can see a couple things that I use all the time. I often get asked about the best float. What is the best head collar? And I honestly have no idea. The best head collar is the one that fits you best. And that's a really vague general answer that doesn't answer the question at all because it's so independent. This is an example of 3 of the collars I use. We probably have 5 different collars. We bring them all to national conference when we're actually physically in the water for folks to try. Figure out what you like, figure out what fits well and gives you the flotation and support and independence that feels best for you. Oftentimes, if folks want some head support and they want to be upright, we'll put a little bit of weight on their feet, just a little bit, right? Not enough to be a workout, but enough to be a stabilizer. So we'll use floats in combination with weights to give that upright positioning. And you can see Krista here has on her wrist, she has 1-inch wide Velcro floats. And they do a great job of just bringing arms up away from the body. If you're a full-time chair user, either power or manual, your arms are always down next to your side. That impairs the sides of your trunk from being able to take deep breaths. These floats get your arms up and away. It opens up the whole side of your chest to be able to breathe more completely. It puts your shoulders in a posture that they're never in and gets you the opportunity to work in a whole new range of motion and combine that range of motion often with breathing. So some tips for working in the water. If you want to get in and you want to work, the next slide talks about a couple things you can think about. Just being in the water is a workout, and it's a fine place to start. It's a fine place to start. And I repeat that because someone at one of the summits said, you know, sometimes just being in the water, that just feels like a workout to me. But people tell me it's really not. No one knows your body better than you. And sometimes just being in the water and taking in all that sensory input, breathing against the pool, and working on balance in a really dynamic environment, that's where your body is ready to start, and that's okay. Sometimes people are ready to be up and walking and moving, and that's great too. You always want to be aware of head control issues. If you're with your child or with a loved one, you want to keep your hands close to the cheeks and jaws if you're worried about losing head control forward into the water. That'll help keep heads up a little bit, especially if you don't have a collar on. I use collars, and they're great for providing some of that support in upright. But if I really want to work on head control, I keep my hands close to the face, close to the jaw, and I do it without the collar on, because that really gives people an idea of how to care for their head in space and start to learn some of those motor techniques and finding those muscles that you can't find either with your headrest on in your chair full time or with a flotation collar. And light weights, anywhere from 1/2 pound to 1.5 pounds around your ankles for folks who are full-time chair users helps to be a little bit more upright. If you're in a chair full-time, your hip flexors get really tight, and these help to just give you a little bit of anchor to the floor and keep you from popping forward. So where do you find a pool? Where do you find a pool when they're all closed? I was trying to research a pool in Switzerland I used to train at, and that's closed. And I was looking to try and see a pool that a friend of mine works at in Australia. That was closed. So how do you find a pool? At home or in the community, there's several options. In the pools in the community, this is what the pool I get to work in looks like when it has water. Prior to your first day of going to any community pool, go and tour the facility. Don't have your swimsuit. If you have SMA, make sure you're there. Don't just send your care team. You go too. And learn about what that facility has to offer. And know and talk with them about what you need to bring to make your time in the water therapeutic and as independent as possible. Most facilities have rules about what can be brought in. YMCAs especially are pretty tight about not bringing in any outside equipment. If you go and have a conversation with the pool director prior to getting in the water, let them know what you need to be safe and independent. Most of the time, I have had good results with folks being able to get what they need handled. We were in Anaheim last year. If you got to be in the pool with us in Anaheim, hopefully you got to see the swimmer with the dolphin tail. And she is hot in that dolphin tail. She is fast, she is independent, she is proud of what she can do, as she should be. And partway through our time, one of the very attentive lifeguards came over and said, I'm sorry, but we don't allow that in our pool. Clearly this was disturbing for the swimmer. And we had gotten clearance for all our gear, but we hadn't gotten specific clearance for this specific item. So we had a conversation again with the pool director. And once she understood that it provided independence, she was okay with it. But we needed to have that direct conversation. For some reason, adaptive fins seem to be an issue for a lot of pools. So make sure if that's what you use, that you're really upfront with any facility prior to bringing that in, so they understand why you need to use it. And in the age of COVID, you have to evaluate how any community center is using their personal spacing, what the number of people in the facility is at any given time, and how comfortable you feel with their ability to control that kind of traffic. What do touch spaces look like? Do they have automatic doors? What do the bathrooms look like? I have a lot of folks that choose not to use the bathroom. They choose not to use the locker room. They use the restroom before they come. They get in the water. We towel down when we get out. They get back in their chairs and they go home and they shower at home. This was before the age of COVID, but now in this new heightened area, it's something that we are more attentive to, and I anticipate as I head back to the water that more and more of my clients will do. And what are other water options, right? Community pools are not something that we're all going to feel good about. On the next slide, you can see a picture of this is actually an above ground endless pool that one of my clients put in. So we didn't have to do a ton of excavation. They built a structure around it. You can't see it, but there's a track over that pool. Kids used it during the week for therapy. I would come in their situation, their school therapist would come in. They could be really active and independent in the water. On the weekend, they'd turn the temperature down a little bit and mom would use it for triathlon training. It was great. The whole family was bought into it. The whole family had an investment in the water and it was used consistently. I find that if the water is meant just for one person, it doesn't get used as consistently and it tends to sort of fade out of a family's activity repertoire. In this time of COVID, I have had the facility I use has been closed since mid-March. To date, I've had 3 people call us and say, what this time has shown us is the water is essential for our health and mobility. So we're going to put in something at home, whether that be a hot tub, whether that be an endless pool. Those are all options, but those are not options for everyone. I have had people use bathtubs. Bathtubs are hard because they're narrow and they're not super deep. So if you're young, bathtubs can work great because you can get it sort of high enough to be able, the water high enough to be able to work on some balance. Waterway Babies has an inflatable pool that you can put in your bathtub, gives you a little bit more depth. But if you're over about the age of 2, it's too small. We had a family shortly after the pool shut down decide that my kid just needs to be up. My kid's bigger than 2, so that Waterway Babies tub isn't going to work. So they went to Home Depot and bought a new plastic garbage can, and they fill that garbage can up with warm water, And mom stands there and their little guy can be upright and stand in the water and they can play together. And that has been a great creative environment for them. Doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but for those guys, it was really cost effective. It worked in the space they had, and it will get them through until we can get back into the community pool. I have had people ask me about using their Hoyer lift to get into their hot tub or to get into a pool that they might be building. Hoyer lifts in general do not work for pools. They don't have the swing to be able to get over the water. This pool that you see in this picture, you can't see, but there are 2 holes cut in that vertical tile. So if there was a failure with the lift system, that we could get the Hoyer part way under the pool and be able to get the kids out. And we did have to use that once, but there was definitely some pre-engineering that went in when the pool was constructed for that to work. And it was not a workable solution for every transfer in and out. There's a lot to think about when you're in the water at this point. I would encourage folks to continue to think, how can aquatics be of benefit to me or to those I love? Because it's a unique environment that provides independence and input that gravity just doesn't provide for us. Thanks for coming today, and I look forward to seeing you all in Austin.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that fantastic presentation. We really appreciate it. We want to go ahead and address some of the questions that have come in today from some of our attendees.
Great.
So the first question that we have is, should you be doing regular PT in conjunction with aquatics? And how do you find an aqua therapist in your area who really understands SMA?
A lot of the folks I see have some sort of PT outside of what I do. That could be in a private clinic, that could be at school. For the older folks I work with, oftentimes they're connected with PT through the local hospital and they check in quarterly or once or twice a year. As far as finding an aquatic PT who's familiar with SMA, that is challenging. It would depend partially, I think it would depend on where you live. Being up north, there's not a lot of aquatic therapists at all, let alone folks that are familiar with working with folks with SMA. I find that in the south, right, where it's warmer, where you have more pools and more people are invested in aquatic physical therapy, you have folks that have a little bit broader spectrum of awareness and engagement. I would suggest you check in with your local hospital and see what their physical therapy staff knows of aquatic PTs in the area. You can check with the American Physical Therapy Association aquatics section, and they have a list of folks that are aquatic therapists in any one region. That then requires you to do a little bit more footwork and see who actually is engaged with the SMA community versus folks who are just working on folks with orthopedic injuries.
Great, thank you. For another question here that came in is, we are interested in techniques and steps to get a type 2 child who's age 6 swimming and floating confidently. He currently uses a neck float, but is too afraid to dip his head underwater.
I always start, it's hard not, so this is a great question because I have a lot of people that are interested in swimming. It's hard not seeing this 6-year-old without knowing sort of where he is from a pulmonary side. I usually find that kids are really pulmonary concerned. So we start with bubble blowing. And that's the perfect way you can start with that pinwheel. Bring that into the water, then move to the egg flips where he can watch his breath have a physical effect, and then move with bubble blowing. So he gets his lips in the water, he gets his nose splashed a little bit. goggles can help, because then he realizes that he can still see. I have had some kids where their muscle weakness is so concerning that we go to a full face mask, and those can be obtained off Amazon, so they can breathe and they can see, and that has worked well for some of our kids also.
Great, thank you. Another question here that came in is, can you recommend upper extremity activities and benefits?
On the handouts, that is a full list of things that we usually do when we're in the water at national conference. It's a little tricky to move through without actually being in the water, but I think that'll give you some good ideas. When I give that to folks in my practice, I laminate it so it can be poolside. So I would recommend, if you're going to get in the water, take that with you, run it through a laminator first so it's coated in plastic, and then you can really be creative and use those exercises as a springboard. But there's upper extremity, lower extremity, and walking activities all in that handout.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Boy, the questions are coming in for sure. We have a few more here.
Great.
What are some considerations for an independent sitter with a trach, but not on the vent with regard to productive aquatherapy?
So considerations for someone with a trach but not on the vent.
Yes.
The vent isn't actually the concern, although getting water on the vent could be an issue, but the issue is actually the trach and the open port to the lungs. So the concern is keeping that whole upper chest area clear of the water, which makes being in the water challenging. I have some folks that do it in their own home pool, where they have a parent in the water, they have a nurse poolside, and they usually have another parent poolside, so they can really control their environment. In a community pool, you do not have that kind of control over your environment, and keeping that upper chest area dry and free of splashes isn't something you can control, which is why in my practice, we don't ever see folks with trachs.
Right, great. Let's see if we can do one more here. Can
Great.
you discuss the use of ankle weights to assist with walking underwater?
Yeah, I love ankle weights because they can provide both a workout, but more importantly, in what I have found useful, is they provide an anchor. They give you that upright pivot. And the ankle weights that I use, we talked about 1/2 pound to 1.5 pounds, and it really just depends on your overall weight. For the 2-year-olds that I work with, we use 1/2 pound. For the 20-year-olds that I work with, we generally will use 1 pound, sometimes 1.5 pounds. And that gets you upright, feet in contact with the floor, and then you have a place to start walking from. If I do a 10-pound weight, that becomes more of a workout. That becomes really more of a leg workout, hard to move your feet off the floor. So I don't ever go that heavy. I always keep it light. 1/2 pound to 1.5 pounds. Get your feet in contact with the floor. Some people will use an aqua sock, one of those rubberized pool shoes. They're really lightweight, and they help to give a little bit more contact to once you can get your feet down and make walking a little bit easier.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thanks for all your time and for your incredible presentation today. And
thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to everyone who participated today. You'll be receiving a follow-up email with a survey link. We greatly appreciate your feedback. If you have any additional questions after this webinar, please reach out to conference@curesma.org. We appreciate the support from our incredible sponsors for making the virtual SMA conference possible. Have a great day, and be sure to check out Cure SMA's conference webpage for all the upcoming virtual SMA conference educational and networking opportunities. Thank you, everyone.